analytics. So I'm trying to share some useful information and tips concerning the basics of digital analytics, the relevant concepts, how it works, and different considerations from marketing perspective. So let's get going. So what is analytics? Well, analytics, I think this is a good definition. It's both qualitative and quantitative data. So it's all types of data you can get that relates to your business and your competition. So it's also competitive intelligence, not only your own websites analysis, to drive continual improvement of the online experience that your customers and potential customers have, which translates to your desired outcomes, both offline and online. So this definition, though it's a bit old, captures the important dimensions or attributes of analytics, understanding what analytics is about. By the way, this guy in the background is Avinash Kaushik. He was, I believe, the first sort of analytics evangelist working at Google, and he was sort of let's say, an early pioneer and opinion leader in this field. So he has written a couple of books about online analytics, and yeah, I recommend checking out. I believe his blog is still available, so that was a really great resource and source of information. Of course, you know, as times change nowadays, the newcomers coming into the field of analytics might not find him or recognize him. This is the sort of the pioneer's dilemma in a way. He might be a little bit in the background. Now we have new people who are pushing content in LinkedIn and so on. I'm not sure if he's retired or what, but he's not that's not that much active anymore in the field, but his ideas are super solid. So you can consider him still classic in this field. And when it comes to definitions and frameworks and understanding analytics, this Avinash Kaushik is one person to really follow, not follow, but to read, to understand his thinking. So anyway, here is a lot of beautiful components in this definition, mixed method data. So it's not only about quantitative, how some people view digital analytics, that it's only about quantitative data. That's not the case. Then continual improvement, that we actually do something with the analytics data. We just do not observe things, but we actually incorporate them into decision making in our company, and to the benefit of the users, the end users, the customers and visitors. And then that will through that it will also benefit our business outcomes. So it's meaning conversions and usually, yeah, sales or whatever we want to sort of achieve with the digital offering that we're providing, and both offline and online. So this is cross-channel or multi-channel measurement, which is also quite crucial for a multi-channel type of companies. So yeah, it's a good sort of all-encompassing definition. About analytics in practice, I would say analytics is about few areas, understanding a few topical fields. So first of all, platforms, understanding the platforms, analytics platforms that you can sort of incorporate, choose, and use. There are a lot of those. So choosing is a key thing here. And also nowadays, a lot of building. So it's kind of might seem contradictory that we have hundreds of tools and platforms to choose from, like ever more than ever before, but at the same time the trend for building your own custom solution is increasing. It's much more than what it was, let's say, 10 years ago, and we'll go into the reasons a bit today, but it's because analytics has become a lot more challenging than it was previously and we understand those challenges more than we did before. The metrics, so again, metrics, so we'll talk about how to sort of choose them or how to compute them. So again, we can use predefined metrics in different platforms and tools, or we can calculate our own. And again, there are cases where we want to calculate our own metrics because they might not be available in the ready-made analytic solutions. And then tools, so regarding the use of analytics data, dashboard tools, visualization tools, analysis tools, major part of the industry, major part of this work in practice, how to choose the right tool set. Again, so many tools there. How do you choose the ones that matter? And then you need to take the time to learn them to develop your professional skills. So that would be, again, major part. But tools are just one area. So all these other things matter as well. And especially the thinking. You should think about what you're doing. So there are different, let's say, schools of thought and frameworks, thinking frameworks when it comes to analytics and when it comes to modeling a company's data. All of this stuff, what KPIs we choose, how we measure them, how we record, how we store data, how we attribute different marketing actions to specific channels and campaigns. Those include a lot of decisions. There is no single one objective way of doing that, but there might be, okay, I choose to do it like this because I believe that. There is absolutely no, this is not science. There's no truth here. And the analytics data we get is always somewhat flawed. We will never get 100% perfect data, especially when it comes to web analytics, but also, in fact, when it even comes to our own proprietary analytics. There are gaps and challenges always. So how we sort of parameterize and how we what we need to be aware of these shortcomings and limitations and possibilities to configure and choose different implementations. So that awareness is very important for us as digital marketers, that we understand that there's not just one way of doing it, that, okay, there's Google Analytics and then that's it, that's the same as digital analytics. So that's not obviously the case. But for many marketers, it might be because they don't have deeper knowledge of this topic. So we first need to have awareness of the depth of this field, and then we might then choose to follow certain type of approaches because we believe that they are working better. So briefly speak, or let's say in general, we could use analytics for three things: reporting, optimizing, and strategic insight. So reporting here means that this is the typical standard way in meetings and reporting in verbal format, through presentations, through reports that we write about campaign performance, about channel performance, about our performance as marketers. We need to report, and for that we need numbers and evidence, so that those numbers and evidence is coming from analytics sources, and therefore we use the analytics as a means for reporting. But we also use it for optimizing. So this means in our, let's say, daily or weekly, depending on our optimization routine or frequency, we look at the numbers from the analytics, and this is more granular. So if reporting is broader, so to speak, so we might not go into all the details, but in optimization, we might need to drill down very deeply into individual campaigns, into individual audiences and keywords and ads to try and make changes that will bring us this continual improvement that Kaushik was talking about. So optimizing is another area, and then strategic insight. So this is an interesting sort of idea in that how can we use digital analytics to produce information that helps the strategic management and planning of the company. So this goes beyond just reporting and beyond making this sort of operational or tactical optimization decisions, but this is actually for the top management. So an example here is the use of Google Trends. So you used Google Trends in your weekly task. So through that, if we analyzed, for example, our competitors and our own brand, like one team, for example, did. So through those kind of analysis, we might detect some seasonalities. We might do the analysis based on specific market regions, like comparing Finland, Sweden, or USA, Singapore, or and so on and so on. So to produce some information that, okay, here's a gap where we are not doing well, or here's a gap that we could actually capture because we are doing well on a similar market, but here in this market we are, so this type of analysis could, this one example, there are other ways also, but this is an example of how we could leverage digital analytics data to produce information for strategic decision making. So these are the three levels for using analytics in company operations. And of course, analytics, or let's say the data produced using analytic techniques, because it can be used for optimization, these tools or platforms, marketing platforms, might also use it to automate decision making, right? So some of these decisions, as we discussed earlier in the online advertising lecture, a lot of the decisions that we used to do manually as marketers are now being automated or have been automated. So the experience of using Google Ads is very different now in 2024 than it was in 2014, for example. You wouldn't, it's totally different. So so that's because of this analytics data has been incorporated into machine learning models and automated decision making to sort of automate some parts of the marketing process. So digital analytics, my definition is a little bit more concise than Avinash's. So using digital tools to collect and analyze data on people. So again, I'm not talking about customers only, I'm talking about people. So people can be a user of a product or service. It can be the buyer, so the customer, or it can be some other person. So, we can cater to all kinds of audiences, the elderly, the retired, children, non-profits, or whatever segments that might not be customers or categorizable in any other way. So I prefer, and we use a lot this in our research, the concept people, because these are all people, but their role might be a little bit different. So it's people data. Web analytics and ad analytics are at least a couple of relevant subsections for marketers. So web analytics is, for example, Google Analytics. So it's data about people accessing websites or apps, and it can also integrate. So for example, in Google Analytics, through this kind of measurement model, you can integrate data from points of sale, so offline sales points, and sort of see it appear in the Google Analytics reports as well. But it's mostly about website visitors, what we also call traffic, and also nowadays apps. So one reason why Google shifted I'll talk about it in a bit, but they drastically and radically changed the logic of Google Analytics just a couple of years ago, from what was known as Universal Analytics to what is known as GA4. And one reason for it was to support different types of not only websites, but also apps. So they changed from sessions to events, kind of the logic. And it was a big radical shift in analytics industry. So the web analytics is a major component, and then ad analytics. So this is data that we would get from Google Analytics, Google Ads, Meta Ads, Twitter ads, LinkedIn ads, or let's say all marketing platforms. They produce similar reports similar to what we could get from Google Analytics, and they are more granular. We'll talk about the challenges also in a bit concerning that. So analytics platforms, Google Analytics can try to do both. So it actually captures e-commerce reports or sort of this marketing reports, and it tries to be fair to all the channels, and it tries to show you the full picture, whereas an ad analytics platform only, of course, contains information about its channels. So Google Ads only has Google's channels, but it doesn't have Facebook or Instagram or any other Meta channel there, or any other competitor. So this Google Analytics might aggregate data and try to show information about conversions from any marketing source. It doesn't do it well, so that's why it really doesn't work at all nowadays. So but we'll get to that. And analytics aggregators, so these are tools that might be helpful to learn if you're looking to go into analytics profession. Coincidentally, one of the most most, let's say, successful and known companies in the world is Finnish, this Supermetrics. So all it is basically doing is it's pulling data to Excel. So from Google Ads, Google Analytics, Meta Ads, again, it's aggregating the data. So you just connect it to your accounts in any analytics platforms you want to retrieve data from. And then it uses the API, so application programming interface, which is a method for requesting data and also sometimes sending commands to these platforms. But in this case, it's just reading the data. It's not doing any decisions. So it just provides you the data, so you can get it in a table in Excel, and then you can visualize, you can analyze, you can filter, use all the standard Excel functions. And yeah, it also works with Google Sheet and possibly other tools or interfaces or other programs for analysis. But yeah, this is a hugely successful company. You can find them in city center Helsinki, their headquarters, and it started from one-man business, and now it's like employing multiple, I think, dozens of people and revenue in the millions. So this was a great innovation. And yeah, just one person coded this and it became a huge business. A good Finnish invention in analytics. There are other strong Finnish analytics professionals as well. So this Mikael Turen, I think is his name. Maybe I'm mispronouncing, but so he's one. But then we have also others, Simo Ahava and Mikko Piippo especially. So these are, Simo Ahava is probably the most well-known Google Analytics expert in the world. It's interesting that he's Finnish, but he happens to be. And Mikko Piippo is a great analytics thinker. So he owns Hopkins, or he's one of the co-founders in Hopkins, which is the leading analytics firm in Finland. And yeah, he frequently posts about his thoughts, and he's very concept oriented. So he's talking about the problems in the domain and also introducing frameworks. So we'll go into one of his frameworks today if we have time. So those are great thought leaders in the field. But yeah, Supermetrics is one example. And then we have dashboarding tools. So dashboard is different now. It's working in the end stage of the analysis. So Google has Looker Studio, which is a major tool for dashboarding. And then we have other tools as well, for example, Microsoft Power BI and Tableau. That again, these are useful tools for a marketer. Data visualization is part of what we do because we want to tell stories with data. We want to interpret data and we want to find some nuggets, some actionable information, some nuggets that now we found something. We believe that if we would do something, something would change. Remember, when we analyze the data, we don't care about just describing it. Okay, sales increased by 5%. Who cares? What should we do? So that's the big question. That's the analytics challenge, because we need to translate those data into information, and information into insight, and insight into action. So if we don't do that, if we just describe the data, we are again no better than ChatGPT, because ChatGPT can take any data set and describe it in 10 seconds, and it will do a better job than you will do in the whole week of doing it. So analyzing is really about analyzing. It's really about thinking. It's really about trying to find something that makes sense in our business, in our industry. We try to find that from the data. So dashboarding or this kind of visualization is one tool that might help us find some useful insights. Okay, then we can also understand this analytics infrastructure in terms of internal analytics and external analytics, and there's also something in between. So internal analytics means that we are sort of analyzing our own, or let's say our owned or rented properties, because again, social media is this rented land, has rented land problem, as we discussed last time. But here we consider it that it's our asset, one of our assets that we analyze. So we want to analyze those sources, and that's the internal analysis. And but the main emphasis is on our systems. So we might have systems such as CMS, which is content management system. An example of this is WordPress. So this is something that allows you to post. So there we then analyze how our content is doing and performs on the blog, for example. And CRM system is a major thing. So for example, e-commerce company, this contains, so this is customer relationship management. So it relies on a database, and that database contains tables, and usually the database, especially in e-commerce, is built around SQL, so SQL structure, which just means tables that are sort of, so the information is structured in tables, and the tables can be connected. They are relational. So there are IDs in table A and IDs in table B, but the information is different. But now we can use those IDs. For example, let's say you have a table structure that's about orders and customers. Okay, so customers make an order, and more, let's say, products and orders. Okay, so you have an order that's made on a specific product. So these orders tables has information about the orders, and there's an ID for a given product. So now we can look the products table for using that ID and see that this person bought this product. So what are the product attributes? So now we can see more information about the product, color, shape, price, whatever, from the other table. So this is briefly the logic of how SQL works. There's a specific language called SQL to run those queries. It's not difficult to learn, and even ChatGPT knows that language. So if you know what information you want and you know the structure of the tables, you can even use ChatGPT to write those queries, and it will be able to, you can then use software to connect with the SQL table because it's kind of protected, right? So you need login information and you would use desktop software for that. But you can use ChatGPT to write the code and then run it in your terminal program and connect to the database, and it will extract you the information. You can also write queries to get the database structure so you can understand what the data is about. And that's the first step of analysis work. But more of this will be in the AI and ML course. We'll talk more about how to analyze data and how to use it then. So internal analytics and external analytics. External is this kind of competitive intelligence idea. So we have SimilarWeb, which is a useful tool. If you haven't heard of it, check it out. There's a free version that you can input any URL there, and it shows you the estimate traffic of that website, and a ranking of it. And then there's a paid version that gives you really nice information about its estimate of what is the source of traffic for that website. So you can neatly see that, okay, how are we doing in terms of traffic, in terms of popularity compared to our competitors. You can actually compare within the SimilarWeb tool. And then if you are using the paid version, you can really collect more. It's using panel of users. Its panel is quite expansive. So the information, every time I've seen, I compare it to our own information. It has been pretty accurate. So that's an interesting tool. Yeah, Google Trends, Facebook Audience Insights, you have different types of tools. So I mentioned earlier that there's sort of a pull toward systems where or pull toward more customized solution, even though we have more of these tools and platforms available for analytics than before. So it sort of often happens. So we use existing platforms. So example, we use Google's BigQuery. So BigQuery can get that Google Analytics data that is shown to you in aggregate as aggregate reports. So aggregate means that for a given period, for a given group of people, you have, for example, 50 visits. So aggregate means you have that, it's a number, it's a summation, it's 50, okay? But you might want to look at all the visitors individually, like what they do. Or you might want to analyze customers individually. You don't just not interested in all of them. Sometimes you need individual level data to do statistical analysis, for example. It's required, or you just want to drill down into the individual. So Google BigQuery, you can set it up. It's a database, and you can set it up to collect clickstream data, which is individual level data from your Google Analytics installation. So this is pretty neat. So these kind of things, companies are doing more because it affords them better, more detailed analysis than the standard installation of Google Analytics, for example. And then they can combine different data sources there, and then they can do their custom reports more efficiently than, or let's say more powerfully than you can do in Google Analytics. So yeah, there's a lot of need for this kind of expertise. So I already mentioned several tools that are useful to learn. BigQuery is among those. So again, if you are looking to become an analytics professional, BigQuery is a very useful technology to learn. Okay, so let's look at some of these tools here just briefly. So I mentioned already web analytics. There's also, so Google Analytics is the big dog, and it had, at least, not sure of the after TA4, but before TA4 it had over 80% market share. So roughly similar to Google's market share in search market is above 80 in most of the Western world, uh, as we talked in the SEO lecture. So actually, the similar situation is in analytics market. So web analytics, Google has this, and yeah, Google bought a company back in the day, and that company then was renamed into Google Analytics or their software. And yeah, Google gained a big dominance, and this is very useful for Google because now this tracking is well integrated into Google Ads. So Google Analytics always shows good figures for Google ad campaigns, but for other channels, there are gaps in the analytics tracking, so that are really, really difficult to fix. So it always shows that other channels are just underperforming. I think it's not because Google wants to be unfair. It's just because it's connecting two of its own systems, so it can do the tracking um, much better, sort of naturally. So it's just naturally, but as a side consequence, then its numbers look to be better, and people are investing in Google Ads more, and so on and so on. So, but anyway, that's a strategic thing. There's an alternative for Google, which is an open source version, and it's called Matomo, and they have also this commercial spin-off from the same technology, or as we call, I think you could call it fork in programming language. So it's a Pivik Pro. And then there are dashboards like I mentioned, Looker Studio. It used to be called Data Studio from Google, then from Microsoft is Power BI, which is sort of Excel with steroids, and then Tableau, which is a classic data visualization tool. So here's an example of what you have in GA4. So you have these reports on the left side, and on the right side you have them appearing as sort of these widgets, the information. I'm thinking about using this for the weekly task. So GA4 has a demo account, so we might get into that this week on Friday. And then here is Matomo. This Matomo is it's a heavy copy or imitation of Universal Analytics, so the previous version of Google Analytics. Therefore, some people who didn't want to move into the Google Analytics 4, they in fact jumped ship and they went to Matomo. But that's a minority of the users, because Google really has such a strong stronghold of web analytics, that when it asked everyone to redo their analytics, they do. It's crazy. So a lot of labor, a lot of effort went to those Google Analytics 4 stuff, but I think a lot fewer people shifted, even though they changed, the reporting, they changed the whole logic. And to be honest, in my opinion, Google Analytics 4 is much weaker than Universal Analytics was, especially for e-commerce tracking. A lot of the reports are gone. You cannot get them. It's more difficult to actually configure it, even though they claim it is easier. I mean, in terms of creating custom reports and so on. So it was a step backwards, in my opinion, but it's amazing. Actually, there is a backlash among professional, advanced analytics users. And I know people, well, myself included, but also others who have like sort of permanently downgraded their use of Google Analytics because of this GA4 shift. They say it has sort of opened their eyes on of the problems that GA has, and they are now using alternative solutions. But they are not using Maton, they use some other techniques that, especially marketing mix modeling and triangulation. We'll talk about those in a bit. Looker Studio, so this is nice. Also, this is aggregation in the same sense as Supermetrics, so you can connect data sources, and then you can visualize the data in form of dashboards, and you can share these. So this is more of a cloud-based solution, whereas Supermetrics would be often you run it locally. There are different pros and cons comparing like Looker Studio and Supermetrics, I think tool like Supermetrics is very flexible and you can do pretty much anything after you have retrieved the data. But the options in SaaS, software or cloud-based tool is that you can just only do what they enable you to do. If that's what you want, this is super easy to set up and share, and visualizations looks nice by default. But if there is something missing here you would like to do with data, then it's simply not possible. But in the idea of the Looker thing and a lot of the driving philosophy between Google's BigQuery and all of its analytics stuff is that it is sort of giving you also access to them through Google Cloud. So if you have an IT department or if you know to code things, so this Google Cloud platform has kind of all the services. It's similar to what Amazon has, Amazon Web Services, and what Microsoft has, the Microsoft Azure platform and so on. So these big tech companies provide these cloud-based services, and they are sometimes very easy to set up even through the UI, but they also afford you to run custom code, so you can do all kinds of integration. So the idea of cloud is that you just pay for the storage of your data, so you don't need to have your own servers, but they have like infinite storage. So no matter how many gigabytes you want, they can scale up to your need. Or if you want very small, it also works. And the same with computing power. So you can literally connect GPUs, 10, 12 GPUs, how many you want. You just push a button and that computing power becomes accessible to you. And yeah, this data source integration. So as I mentioned, you can automate stuff, automate data collection from different sources, and it's stored in BigQuery, and then maybe BigQuery can release it to Looker Studio, and you can build any type of stuff. So it is still flexible because it sort of relies on this cloud philosophy that anything can be built, and these big companies want you to build on top of their platforms because every time you sort of use their resources, you pay them. They have all this server capacity that they're using to run their own services like Google search and Amazon website and so on, but that has excess capacity, so they monetize it through this idea of giving you access to the resources, and it can be quite affordable. So for many small companies, of course, it would be a huge fixed cost to buy servers, and it's difficult. So these tools are often relatively easy to use and very scalable. So it's not super expensive at all, like to store gigabytes of data, maybe just a few euros per month. And so it can be very feasible, but it is also profitable for them. These cloud divisions of these companies are, I think, the fastest growing business area that they have. So here's an example of Power BI. So yeah, this is like I said, Excel with steroids. So Excel has a general limitation of with big data sets. So at least previously, it had a limitation of not being able to handle more than 1 million rows of data. So we can quickly exceed 1 million rows of data if we are working in a company that produces big data, so to speak. So Power BI can handle data sets that are much bigger. The interface is similar to what Excel would be. It enables you to connect into multiple tables, and those can be dynamic and updating. It has better dashboarding functions than Excel has. You can share these dashboards, and they can update also dynamically. So yeah, this is, if you were to choose to master, Microsoft ecosystem, you would go into learning Power BI, and you would go into learning Microsoft Azure technologies. If you were to choose Google platform, you were to learn Looker, Looker Studio, which is competitor to this Power BI, and you would learn Google Cloud. So basically, you can get the same stuff done in Google's ecosystem or Microsoft's ecosystem, or then also I might be the other ecosystems as well. But when it comes to analytics, Google and Microsoft are the strongest. Amazon is not as strong in terms of analytics. Also IBM. This is just kind of my opinion. I'm sure if there were, Amazon people here in this call or IBM people, they would strongly protest and they would find argumentation. But this is just I'm looking at the tools and checking them out. So I find and also how they invest in them. Well, in my opinion, it's either Google or Microsoft when it comes to this advanced analytics tooling at the moment. Maybe it will be different in a few years, who knows, but at the moment in 2024. And then we already discussed this kind of briefly or touched upon this idea of you can have your in-house data infrastructure. So I mentioned MySQL is one incarnation of the SQL database, is the most classic one. I think this one also was invented by a Finnish person. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was more than Mikos, the um, Finnish guy. He's living in Silicon Valley, but yeah, I think, yeah, indeed, this one as well. So yeah, Finns have a lot of strong history within the analytics industry, which is interesting. So these type of tools support both aggregate, so group data, and individual level analysis, because in the MySQL database we have the individual rows for each customer, each order, each product. So that means they are at a row level, individual level data. And aggregate data is something you have in Google Analytics reports. You never see individual user there. You never see that, unit of one. It's always grouped by some dimension. So because they want to, I don't know, protect privacy or whatever. But that's the logic of these ready-made tools you cannot get by default. But then, as I mentioned, you have this custom solution of collecting the clickstream data to BigQuery, which is sort of a standard integration, I guess, nowadays when you want to collect the clickstream data, because Google has made it relatively easy to do it. So as long as you use Google's cloud infrastructure and run BigQuery database, you can integrate it quite easily with Google Analytics. Again, Google wanting to hook you with their systems. Of course, you can export the data in your own servers, and you can back up it where you want. That's fine. It's basically your data, but they want to store it and they charge you for it. That's storing. And every time you query it and process it, I think there's also a charge. It's like a few cents maybe, but it will add up. But yeah, the cost factor is not prohibitive. How to do it and why to do it are the challenges. So this is beautiful technology, sort of everything is possible, but we as marketers need to figure out how and why we should use it and not just chase the latest technology because it's possible, we should do it. No, we should think, okay, what should we do? And then we look at what is possible. Nowadays, almost everything is possible when it comes to data, which is a good thing. Much harder to think what and why. Yeah, so yeah, these systems that you build are generally better, but they take more time and money, and they require that expertise, that technical expertise of programming skills, but also that business expertise to actually create the requirements. So for these systems, you need requirements, and those requirements need to be compatible with your business goals. So again, someone who understands a little bit technology, understands a lot of business, can be very valuable here, because that's, the programmers, they don't care usually about the business, unless if they are startup people, then they are multi-talents. but the average programmers or engineers, they care more about the technology and less about the business. It's really visible difference if you work with them. You're like, okay, I didn't know you can think like that. But so it's yeah, I strongly encourage you to work with programmers, that they are super people. So then we have different things to different paradigms. So I mentioned that one area or domain here is thinking, ways of thinking. So those are important. Uh, I mean, it's important to know about the alternatives. So one thing is what should we track, because again, we can track everything. And that's literally the strategy that Facebook chose in the early days. So every interaction, every piece of information that they could track about the users and their behavior on the platform, they did, just in case they could later monetize it or use it to analyze user behavior and improve the platform further. So this was their famous maxim: let's track everything we can. On the other hand, we can have this other paradigm, which is one metric to rule them all, or so-called North Star metric ideology. So this is the opposite for many startups, that they only want to care about one metric, for example, growth of users. That's all they use. And they're just obsessed with that metric, and basically everything they do is reflected in that metric. That metric is projected on the office wall in real time, and they live and breathe to increase that metric. So that's a different sort of paradigm to analytics. Then there are things in between. So we as marketers might have a funnel idea. So funnel, for example, is attention, interest, desire, action. Um, so at different stages of that funnel, that is in our minds, that we want to apply to understand customer behavior. So in attention, we have different set of metrics. Attention, we look at, reach, view rate. Then interest, we look at, okay, clicks, time on site. Desire, we look at, okay, visit, add to cart, number of times added to cart. And action, okay, how many conversions, how much sale. So we could sort of segment the metrics we choose and look at based on this idea of funnel that's quite common in marketing. And there's a variation also in this selective metric strategy, which is Mikko Piippo's idea, minimum viable analytics, or MVA. So it just means that do not configure your analytics to track any information that you are not planning to use. So this is quite easy to state. So you have a plan for using that metric or information that you're tracking. If not, no, don't track it. So that's kind of trying to connect you with the actionability of the use of analytics, because literally we have hundreds of metrics available. So we need to make anyway choices of what we'll use. We cannot cope with all of them. It will be information overload. And then on the other, like there is, let's say, minority opinion, let's track nothing at all. So it's becoming so difficult to track, and that information is not accurate due to various challenges. And yeah, it's difficult. So this again, Mikko's idea that maybe we should move back to Claude Hopkins's methods, then we just run campaign codes and check them in checkout, and sort of this idea that maybe let's just do things and let's just track the big things and forget about the nitty-gritty analytics. So that's some people are thinking more of it nowadays because of this complexity. They find it unnecessarily difficult, so they instead focus on doing something else. So no analytics is an interesting idea. Then there is important paradigms concerning the data sources. So I mentioned earlier that we have these marketing platforms' own metrics. So for example, Google Ads and Meta Ads could show how much revenue they generated last week. So Facebook generated 5,000 and Google generated 15,000. But the problem is they could be part of the same customer journeys. So it's not 20,000 in total, but our revenue is actually only, you know, 17,000. So they are now over-reporting our revenue if we just sum them up. So there's this duplication problem. It's not tracking the whole path, but only if that channel had any role in any role in conversion, it might take the full credit of it. So it results in this inflation, attribute inflation. It's taking too much credit, the channel, of its performance. So and a traditional approach then to solve this is to use Google Analytics. And Google Analytics is measuring all the referral traffic, whether it's coming from Facebook or TikTok or wherever. And in theory, it now can duplicate this, and it can, in theory, show assisted conversions and last click conversions, and it can give more granular data. In practice, it doesn't work. I've never seen it work, and yeah, I've never seen anyone else also in any other business case except the ones I'm involved in seeing it work. So it categorically, for example, shows underperformance for Meta ads. And we don't know what the true performance is, but the gap between what Meta reports and Google Analytics reports is just so big that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of how a channel affects. But it's not possible to know that from Google Analytics. So it's very limited actually. It's not it's not reliable. It just overemphasizes Google's performance. So one of these approaches then to use the marketing mix modeling, which means that we simply observe how much money we put in to different channels and how much so those would be independent time series variables, and then dependent time series variable is our actual sales. And this econometric model running in the background will try to see how those cost or spend is predicting the variation in the sales, and therefore kind of find out what is the true effect of the different channels on sales. So this is becoming more. So again, if you're doing something, thesis or something, I really recommend this marketing mix modeling as a topic, because it is one of the big trends now going on in the analytics industry, and people are really trying to use it as an alternative to this like GA4 type of approach. Also because of privacy problems, cookie problems, all of that stuff. None of it matters for MMM because we are observing like sort of like that's not part of how it's computed. So this is works irrespective of any privacy issues that you might have with GA4. Any mobile device issues, you might have device gaps and whatever gaps in this. You have those because the data is not really what it should be in GA4. There's also triangulation approach, so we can have post conversion surveys asking people where did you come from. We can run customer surveys asking how people's behavior was changed. So and then we can compare it. So for example, from a survey we could see that, oh yeah, a lot of people mention that YouTube videos is a major driver for their conversion. But actually in GA4, you can see that social media generates close to zero. So again, we see discrepancy of what people report affecting their behavior and what Google Analytics reports. Maybe it's because they didn't click the ad, so there's no trace of there's nothing to attribute. use the clicks to attribute. So maybe that's one of the reasons why there is disconnect. But from MMM perspective, we know we put this and this much money into YouTube this month, and last month we put less, and now we can see increase in like sales. So that type of logic is what MMM tries to use, that it's seeing how much we actually invest in channels and how then the sales are like sort of varying, how well it's varying with our investments in different channels. So important skills in analytics: metric selection, from business objectives to specific goals and to metrics. Yeah, metric choice can be anything. So I mean, it requires thinking, and yeah, also, well, application of metric is problematic. Like I said, sometimes it can hide things. Sometimes things are not visible in metrics, like real effects. So we shouldn't just look at the metric and think of it as like truth. It's just sort of like an approximation of truth. Even the number of visitors that you see in Google Analytics is not correct. If it says you have 521 visitors, it's not correct. It's something else. But how much it has an error, it depends like on I think, but that's just the basic example. Even the number of visitors is not correct. So more advanced things will be even more wrong, but we don't know by how much, because never there's an error margin reported in association with number. That one number 521 is reported as truth, but it's not in fact. So metrics, understanding metrics, selecting metrics, grounding them to real business objectives is a key skill of a digital analytics professional. Data storytelling, how to present numbers, how to visualize, how to interpret them to find those opportunities, those actions that we should take, is a major skill. That is something that if you can do well, you can really produce huge value for the organization you work for. But yeah, that requires thinking. So thinking behind it is the key thing. Analytics installation and configuration. As marketers, you can either have some hands-on expertise on this technical, so knowledge of JavaScript. For example, JavaScript is used often as technique for tracking. So JavaScript scripts run and record the information and the data that is then used by analytics platforms. But if you are not interested in going deep, then at least you should learn about technical requirements. Meaning, so again, this is the same as we discussed with online advertising. It's now advertising is very feed based. So you need to understand what our feed consists of and what there should be. And you need to collaborate with IT to configure the feed so that your products are showing in Google Shopping the way they should be. And TikTok Shopping, Meta Shopping, they have all these have feeds, right? So the idea is universal and you need to understand it. So in analytics, the same is here. What should we track and how should we track? Again, a lot of choices. It's not just okay, IT person, take this code and install us the analytics. Right? Doesn't work because it can be done in very many different ways. There are choices there. How long should we collect the data? What kind of data should we collect? What are the events here? What should our reports? How do we use the data? So these are all intertwined. So we cannot just say, oh, I'm a marketer, I don't know about this installation. Here is a link to Google's website. Go and find out and do the installation for me. And then I just want to see the report. So that's a useless way of thinking, right? Because okay, the developer saying, what report? What do you want in the report? and how should I do this stuff. So if you just do it like that, they do something randomly that they think, okay, I do this, I do that, and they might make something that not is optimal for the business. And then even though you might get a number, it might not be the number that it should be. It might have some error, or there might be some other number you want, and so on and so on. So there's really no, if you want to work in digital analytics, there's no avoiding the technical part. You need to understand it well enough to be valuable here. You cannot just say, I'm only a user. I don't need to know anything about how analytics works. That's not going to cut it. So in the past, this was how many people did, because Google advocated for that approach in the past, where there was easy installation process where you just copy paste the code and everything starts working. But nowadays, for analytics to be useful and to really capture the things we want for the business and to make sure that there are no errors in the process, uh, it is more challenging. So that's why it's interesting it going contra current, in the sense that usually things become easier over time. But in analytics, complexity has increased and we have become much more aware of the problems in data quality, and a lot of them can be traced into poor requirements, poor installation, which is not programmers' fault, but it's the fault of lack of guidance. And that guidance is, for example, what make Hopkins very successful, because they can charge for working hours when they do consultation and fix the things that were wrongly done by marketers who didn't understand what they are doing or what they're asking for. So you need to understand how tracking works, and then you need to understand the business side of things, right? And then you need to understand nowadays things like with the privacy legislation. And again, here, the privacy legislation, you shouldn't approach it as an excuse or as something that will give you value, because it, like, in the end, you want that information, you need that information. So legislation is something you need to comply with, but that's not your competitive advantage is not that you comply with legislation, right? Your competitive advantage is that you get the information and you analyze it. So legislation will not help you. It not make it easier or better for you. It makes it harder, right? So it's sort of like an obstacle in our way. We need to cope with it because we need to comply with the law. But your question is how to move forward despite of the legislation, not that, oh, how can I be the most ethical marketer? Because that's not going to bring you the competitive advantage for actually making business choices that help you match the competition. And there's a lot of problems in over legislation in the EU. And you can see it just from the fact that Europe has zero super platforms. All the platforms, major platforms in the world, are either American or Chinese, and the EU is well known of having excessive legislation that's actually hampering. So we shouldn't think of it as our competitive advantage, because it's clearly not. But okay, it's there, but we need to know about it, we need to comply with it, but then we need to get the data and do something that is actually a competitive advantage. So that's my recommendation on how to approach the legislation. Yes, so metric selection, there are ways to approach it. So a couple of thoughts on that. We can see a division between sales metrics and visibility metrics. So remember that the goals can roughly be divided between, we want awareness. So, and that doesn't mean we want just impressions. Impression would be usually a poor metric also in awareness. But maybe traffic is already better. Maybe quality traffic that spends time on the site is even better at that. But anyway, so those are non-conversions, non-direct conversions. And then there are the sales metrics that are that are focused on the sales, and that's called performance marketing or direct performance or ROI-based marketing, different names, but it targets directly to sale and not generating awareness for our new thing. And often these sales metrics, especially in e-commerce, are a lot more appreciated than the visibility metrics, and it's an interesting dualism there, because I've had several times cases where they say, let's run the brand campaign to get visibility. But then in the middle of the campaign, it's all of a sudden changes, and they start to panic. Why is this not bringing sales? And then you're telling them, yeah, but it's a brand campaign. That's what you wanted. They still say, but yeah, but it should still generate sales. And then they look at the sales after it, and then they're disappointed because the brand campaign didn't bring sales. So I just observed this pattern multiple times, which is interesting, that even though people in theory understand this division, when they run an e-commerce site, even for the brand campaigns, they actually are looking for sales. So that's why I kind of, when I run these campaigns, I kind of keep their budgets low, because I know then in the end we should run the sales campaigns more and focus on those metrics more. So, but in theory, everything can target at getting a direct response now, or let's say within this week. We want the conversion to happen in the very, very near future, or latent or indirect response that, okay, this something will happen later on. So when a need arises, then they will remember us and acquire our products or services. So here are a few metrics. Basic metrics, so CPM, cost per mille. This is often what we call a vanity metric in many cases, because it's extremely easy to generate impressions in millions. Maybe for a couple of hundred of euros, I can generate a million impressions, right? Which is a big number, sounds very impressive, but then often it results in no actual sales, or there's no correlation with sales because of the banner blindness. So this is bad metric to optimize for, and usually report also. Cost per click, how much it costs to drive traffic. This is becoming more important nowadays than previously. Previously, it was considered also useless, because of the quality of traffic can be very different. So a person who's ready to buy versus a person who's just randomly clicking the ad without a real intent to buy, there's obviously huge value difference between them. But nowadays, I'm seeing this used by some companies more, because they think that, okay, we actually we want to drive traffic, and that has a very actually correlation with the overall growth of the company, and then we can run these effective retargeting campaigns until the people sort of get convinced and persuaded and buy. So it's not completely useless. It's interesting, because previously this idea of clicks as useless was kind of, or not as not a key metric, was quite prevalent. But it's still like, after click you can actually check what is the behavior on the site. So time on site, or if people bounced, if they leave immediately, click without clicking forward. If that bounce rate is very high, then it's an indication of low quality traffic from that source. So there are ways to try to check the quality of the traffic from web analytics, like GA4. Okay, GA4 removed bounce rate, which is another ridiculous stuff that they did. They replaced it with something called active user. So they just did a random thing and removed one of the most useful metric. So that's one example why people don't like GA4. But in principle, there are ways even in GA4 to try to ascertain the quality of the traffic. Click-through rate can tell how interested people were with your ad. It also has some challenges here. I'm not going into these challenges. You can read them later, and please do, because they might be part of the exam, this lecture part of the exam material. So I'm just showing these tables or including them because all of the point is that all of the metrics have their specific deficiency and there's no perfect metric out there. So that's a general challenge we have. So cost per action is one that's also very useful, as we discussed in online advertising lecture. This is one of the metrics that was predominant in, let's say, 10, 12 years ago as an online advertising metric. So how much it costs to acquire a customer. Very important metric still today, but being replaced by ROAS nowadays in online advertising. Conversion rate, how many people convert from those who visit on the website. So this is, again, this is a good solid metric to look at performance, but it doesn't consider how much people are spending, and there can be a big variety in the average order value by channel or campaign. So that's why ROAS is considering that, because the return part of that equation is in euros. And yeah, ROAS is sort of a variation of return on investment. So more broadly speaking, return on investment considers all the costs that you have for running a campaign or channel, and then the revenue coming from it. So this is a good metric, but it doesn't consider what happens after that immediate purchase, right? So customers have the lifetime. They buy once, they buy the shoes, but if they only buy once, they are not good customers. Versus, someone who buys shoes for 100 euros might seem a better customer than someone who buys for 50, right? But if we think that 100 euro buyer only buys one time and then never comes back, and that 50 euro buyer comes every 3 months to buy again for 50 euro. So now we can easily see that after 3 months, that 50 euro buyer is already more valuable to us than the 100 euro buyer, right? They generate 150 euros of revenue versus 100 euro. So this is the customer lifetime value, and this is not effectively measured in Google Analytics or Google Ads, which is the shortcoming of this measure, because it's not used really because of this availability bias. It's not readily available in those platforms. So because it would require us to provide custom data back into those platforms, and they're sort of not by default built for that. So you would need to calculate your own CLV value from yourself from your database data and do that. So most marketers, they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to approach SQL. They don't know even where their data is stored. They just know that there's Google Analytics and it shows this value of ROAS or whatever, and then they look at that metric because it's there, it's available, it's easy. So this availability bias drives a lot of the behavior. And again, if you want to be have competitive advantage, then you will go beyond what is available, and you would learn how to compute CLV, and you would work with programmers or whoever to get you that CLV value, and then you could get better understanding of what is the lifetime value of people coming from different channels. There might not be a difference, maybe the lifetime value is the same, but without checking, you don't know, right? So it's easy to measure. You just compute for 1 year period how many times a person buys. coming from Google. Like what is the euro value of that? That's literally one SQL query. It can be written in one SQL query, like very easily by ChatGPT in one like 10 seconds. But you know, knowing how to ask it in the first place, and so then you get the average through all those summations. You get an average how many, maybe, you know, it will be whatever euro amount. But it's not difficult, but it is difficult, so that's why it's not done. So it's difficult enough so that people don't do. There's a lot of stuff that's sort of a low-hanging fruit. It requires more thinking, more effort, little bit going outside the box. Nobody likes, they like easy solution, ready-made. They don't like to think. They don't like to, you know, reach out. They prefer that cozy little box. So they don't do. But there's a lot of stuff like this in digital marketing, and like I would say probably any profession where you can a relatively, you know, small effort into learning stuff, extra stuff, and all of a sudden you're like, boom, what the hell? I just, you know, I spend a little bit time learning this, and now I'm all of a sudden I'm better than 90% of the marketers because I can compute CLV, and it's like, what? Oh my God. By the way, there's an interesting CLV plugin for Shopify, also developed by a Finnish person, Karri Koivuniemi, Lifetimely. This is again one successful analytics story because he sold that company and he's now an investor, and he has a new startup as well. But that tool's only job was to calculate CLV value from Shopify data. Shopify had a nice ecosystem of enabling developers to build plugins. So Karri went ahead and built this because he identified that this availability bias and nobody using CLV because it's difficult or just difficult enough not to do it, right? So yeah, he developed an app for that and became a millionaire. Very nice, very nice. It wasn't easy though. I encourage you to check he definitely earned it because he spent, he had like, you know, 50 calls in a week, sales calls, and he did all the sales. He ran the development. He hired people, freelancers first for it, and then a business partner to do the development. But he was basically a marketing guy who had this idea and executed it and solved the CLV problem for Shopify. But that only applies for companies or e-commerce sites running on Shopify, which there some of them are, but not all. Okay, so uh, another thing about metrics, a tip I would like you to remember: absolute and relative values might be difficult or easy to understand. Let's see how we can explain this. So, absolute means um, absolute means the current, let's say, okay, in this scenario, I think in this example, so uh, Google is generating 10,000 euro per week sales. Facebook is generating 1,000 euro, so it's 1/10. So now we're going to say Google is much better channel for us because it's 10 times bigger than Facebook, right? So the idea here with the relative is that, okay, now we go into conversion rate, for example, and then, okay, conversion rate for Google is 2.1, but Facebook it's 3.1. So it's 1 percentage point higher. So now with the relative figures, we could say, okay, this channel is now much smaller, but it's converting better than Google. So maybe we should increase the investment there and see if conversion rate stays higher than Google when we sort of scale up. It doesn't always happen, actually. That's interesting. When you scale, increase the budgets, conversion rates might decrease. Often it happens, actually. So, but anyway, that would be now a thing that we will test, right? So the idea here, and it applies to anything, you can have individual campaign in Google Ads or Facebook, and this campaign is generating much less revenue. But if I look at the return on ad spend, it's higher than our bigger campaigns. So I'm now thinking, can I increase the volume of this campaign? Can I spend more money in this campaign so that I would get, the average total return on ad spend of the account would increase. So that's why, but again, absolute values are also important because you would sort that, okay, these are huge campaign that's spending 5,000 euros per month or week. And then there's some very small spending 50 euros a week. So I don't want to spend too much time on the 50 euro because I can see already that, it's already kind of scaled to the keywords that it's using. I mean, there's not much search volume there, so I cannot increase it even if I wanted. So that therefore I'm just focusing on the bigger spenders and what can I do there to improve the ROAS. So both types of metrics, absolute and relative, matter when we do optimization. And it's very important. So some people make the mistakes here that, for example, they report, oh, yeah, look at this Facebook conversion rate. It's 3.1. Really cool, right? It's higher. But then we look at the number of conversions, 3. And then, oh, holy crap. Okay, now we are looking at the comparing relative and looking at the absolute, right? So with 3 conversions, can you say something significant? No, it's probably just noise, right? So that's another mistake that a lot of even actually professional, I've seen them doing this mistake, but it's not strictly speaking their fault, but it's the fault of the company trying to have this weekly thing, and then they over interpret every small thing. And I've seen them make inferences based on 3 products less sold or something like that. It makes absolutely no sense because it's just statistical noise. So if you look, relative change, oh yeah, we lost 12% on sales of this product, but it went from 7 to 5. So come on, like there's no real nothing there. It's just, the last week someone bought it 7 times, this week 5 times, nothing. There's nothing there. So now we should be looking at something went from 100 to 50. Okay, now we have more evidence, right? So this is normal idea with, now we are approaching a little bit statistics ideas. What is a good sample size? What is the law of large numbers and central limit theorem, that kind of stuff, that as you have more data, then you're starting to, that pattern is more believable and less susceptible to random noise. But yeah, so remember this, if you see relative numbers that are low or high, especially particularly low or high, always check what is the absolute. If the absolute value is very, very small, you can say, okay, it's not enough to say this is high or low. We need to gather more data before we can say if this real conversion rate of Facebook is high or low, because we just don't have enough data to say. And the same with the absolute values. If some channel is very good, very low, look at the relative performance. If it's relatively performing high or low, that will tell you about the potential, if you could possibly scale it up or not. Okay, another thing about the metrics. So this is the correct way of thinking about metrics when it comes to, think about data when it comes to Google Analytics logic. So you have dimensions and metrics. So what does this mean? What does this mean? It's very easy, but this is the logic of how this web analytics works. So dimensions are basically categories. So country or year, those are, for example, categories. And metrics are quantitative measures, for example, revenue. So basically, every time you are aggregating something, you are aggregating it by a dimension. So by default, if you look at the sales in Google Analytics, it's at least by date. So 500 sales in this month, it's aggregated by date or this period. But then you can further aggregate it by country. So, okay, Finland was 10,000, Sweden was 5,000. You can aggregate it by device type. Finland, mobile devices was 3,000. Finland laptops was 2,000. Okay, so you can combine these dimensions to further aggregate the data. So this is part of the analysis process. This is what we mean when we drill down into the data. So we can add filters, for example. So what is the filter? A country equals Finland. That's a filter. Now we only see the sales from Finland. Or device type equals laptop. We can only see sales coming from visitors accessing the website using laptop. So this is kind of the way of thinking about dimensions and metrics, and this was the let's say the paradigm that Google Analytics applied from the early days, that you need to know what dimensions are and what metrics are, and then most metrics you can aggregate by most dimensions. They are not all compatible with one another, but if you know basically a list of metrics and a list of dimensions, then you understand the potential of how you can aggregate the data by different metrics. By this gives you the space of possibilities. Okay, let's put it like that. So everything what you can do now you understand by just looking at two lists, right? Without even going and the reports and trying to click what can I see, because you understand that, okay, these are metrics and I then can group them by these dimensions. You can already visualize it in your head, and then you can try and go get it from Google Analytics, that information, or you could write a query to the API and extract exactly the information you want through the API. And we already discussed about actionable and vanity metrics. So vanity metric is something you just report for some reason, but you cannot take action on it. So actionability is major thing. So you should try to avoid the vanity metric that just is something that is, like this classic example is ad impressions. But then, Facebook fans, those are, nice to have metrics, but they don't, generally speaking, help you improve the business. So they're not actionable. What is actionable and what is not is not easy to define or specify, because it depends on business case. In some of the business cases, these visibility related metrics might be relevant. Like, remember, one of your teams had I think Coca-Cola as the case, and you were talking about conversions as one of the metrics you choose. And then I questioned that during the lecture. I said, does Coca-Cola, why do they sell those Coca-Colas on the website? Why would they care about sales? And they probably wouldn't, right? They would do only because their distribution is retail. They have distribution channels in offline. Why they would run online ads is to make people think of Coca-Cola. So when they go to movies, when they go to store, they would be buying Coca-Cola, but they're not going to log into the website and order some cases of Coca-Cola. I mean, that's not a typical behavior. In my opinion, that's how I would understand the business. So that would not be the correct metric to look at conversions, unless conversion was something else than sales, but it's still difficult to see what it would be. So, Coca-Cola is a good example that could use marketing mix modeling, and they probably do quite heavily, to see how extra ad investments in a specific region drive the actual sales through their distribution network. They don't need web analytics for that. They don't need conversion tracking for that. They need the MMM. So, but more importantly, in their case, these visibility metrics like ad viewability, I still would say impression is useless for them, because a lot of the impressions are suffering from the blindness, banner blindness, and also not all ads are even visible on the screen. Remember, there were viewable impression is a little bit better, but view rates and something that actually would indicate people have seen and processed the ads are like stronger metrics for them. But yeah, so visibility metrics can actually be also part of the core metrics for a company. So it doesn't always have to be about sales. A lot of the examples I give are about sales because I'm often thinking about the e-commerce context, and that is, I think, the kind of default mindset of companies nowadays, that they're selling they want some actions taken online, but it's not always the case. So we have this other part, for example, manufacturers that do not directly sell to consumers but have distributors. So their goal setting and therefore metric setting is a little bit different from e-commerce. A couple of challenges. Analysis paralysis. So we cannot do anything. There are too many metrics to look at, too much data, too much information. You see all these reports and you're thinking, holy cow, what should I do with this? I have no clue. So then you just have to dig in. You have to dig in, try to understand it, and try to, through time, collect some kind of conclusions from there. But generally, yeah, it's a challenge. Second is again this vanity metric, where we follow metrics that are not really compatible with our business goal. They're not actionable. They're not useful for us. We can sometimes use them to pretend that we are having an impact, that we generated this and this many millions of impressions, but I mean, that should be a weak thing for us. We should not be proud of doing such a thing, because we would, if we were good digital marketers, we know that the value of impression is generally zero unless proven otherwise. So even though clients that might not be as sophisticated as us might believe in our story, we should still try to really show the value honestly, and to also report on metrics accordingly. Okay, then we are going into some of the tech stuff briefly. How does web analytics work? So we have a website. This is a basic example. Then JavaScript code that is reporting stuff about visitors to the server. That's recording that data, and that data is then processed. There it's aggregated and it's delivered in web analytics software like Google Analytics in the form of reports that are showing the aggregated data. So this is the standard idea. So this JavaScript code is reporting something. It's collecting data about the visitors and putting it. So there are actually two ways of kind of like conceptually understand this. There are client and server side tracking. So client means the the browser, and it means the JavaScript. So browser loads this JavaScript, and the JavaScript does some parsing on the data and then passes it forward. Server side tracking means that basically every time you visit a website, something is you are making that request for the website. That's how World Wide Web works. You are requesting a page. So that request contains some basic information. So we don't necessarily need a JavaScript snippet there to get that information. We can collect it on our end if we have a website on our website server, something that stores that information for a given user. And then we can process that on the server. So here's an example of what information we can get from the server side tracking: person's IP address, the browser setup, the timestamp, so when the request was made, what specific page the request dealt with, products, category, electronics, and also what they requested in terms of files. They're accessing specific pictures or so on. HTTP headers. So these headers contain some kind of technical information, but they also contain the referrer, so where people came, if they came through some link. So here we can see, okay, they're coming from Google Ads, or they're coming from some referral website. So we can see that. And then query parameters. So query parameters are, you can see this question mark here. So this question mark means a parameter. So this slash search is a site you can access, but you can change these values and numbers here to change the query. Okay, so we can change from laptop to phone, and then the price range we can change, and then the brand we can change. But this is a structure that is sort of a lot of the sites work like this by running the searches on the let's say, the website content through these query parameters. And this is also how tracking works in the UTM parameters. You define these parameters will be campaign, content, channel, source, and then you can put there. You don't need to use it if you are using Google Ads, because again, the integration is perfect. But if you're running a programmatic campaign in some other network, you would typically add to your landing page this information here, and then Google Analytics would know that it's coming from a campaign with this specific information. So these query parameters in that case would not lead into any specific different landing page. It would just lead into this page that you are linking here. It would just use them only for analytics reporting. But in this case, they are actually affecting the site content, because this query is loading specific information, specific products, basically using this query. So we can see this query if the website is configured to use such queries, and we can sort of then parse it in our own reporting. And then forms, so form information can be in text, so that can be also collected. So those are examples of what we can collect without even Google Analytics. So we could build our own analytics system that would, aggregate and group this. Every time someone loads the page, this information is sent. And then every time that person does something on our website, again, this is repeated. So then we would need to define how we actually know that it's the same person, right? So we need to do, because we just see a loading of happening. We don't, by default, we don't know it's the same person. So we would need to match that. Okay, it has the same IP address. It's probably the same. It has also the same user agent. So it's probably the same. And okay, it's coming from a previous page on our website. So okay, it's probably the same session. So these are the things that Google defined when they created the Google Analytics. But it can be actually replicated. If Google would not be available, we could build our own system as well. So then Google has also this consent mode. This relates to privacy, and this, so you've seen these kind of things, personalized ads, and you give permissions, right? So permissions for tracking various things, content and ads and so on. So this consent mode is Google's sort of tool or implementation that helps you, it helps you and the user both. So you as a webmaster can use this sort of implementation to specifically let users choose what they want to be tracked or not. So for every segment here, I included a more I removed others and included those that I think relevant for marketers. So if ads can be stored, stored information can be used for ads, if personalization can be made for ads. So basically we can ask separately users permission for each of these options, and user can grant the permission or deny it, or then for some of them consent might not be required. But it might be tracked just by default. So this tracking is very important, because it's not only used for marketing, but it's also used for websites to recognize you. So it's the reason why if you go to a website, sometimes you're logged in ready. You don't need to log in every time, right? It's very useful, right? It would annoy me every time to log into the same website. So it's because of the tracking, it's because of the cookies. So they serve a really good purpose. And also they serve a really good purpose in advertising. Remember, this is used sort of as an aggregate method. You are being categorized as someone who likes this type of websites, but you are not being singled out, like I explained last time. You are part of maybe thousands or tens of thousands or even millions of people in the same category who like auto sports, for example. Then you see ads that are relevant to your generic interest. So what's wrong with this, right? It's like there's a huge problem with the privacy. Maybe there are edge cases where it can be abused, but I've yet to see actually any of them. People talk about a lot about abuse, but I've never seen any case of like that. I've never seen real consumer harm coming from it. The idea is very sound. We try to infer what you're interested in and show you the ads about such thing instead of just showing you any ads. You know, I'm a male, 39, so I don't, you know, for example, female products for teenage females, they're not relevant for us, for me. But I could see those ads if there wasn't this kind of tracking system. So this immediately provides me with value by showing me ads that, or avoiding showing me ads that I'm definitely not interested in. So we have to remember as advertisers that we should be sort of proud of these kind of systems that really help. What is the purpose of marketing? Match supply with demand. What is needed for that? Information about demand, information about preference. How do we get that? Through analytics. Okay. So if we don't have that, we don't have information, we cannot supply the right products to the people requesting or interested in those products, right? So we need data. We absolutely need it. We shouldn't be ashamed of it, and we shouldn't buy into this mass media uh, like hysteria that it's wrong to collect data about people. It's not. It's absolutely right to do that if especially it's used in non-personally identifiable way as it is done by all these default platforms. Again, they are not singling you out as an individual. You're part of a group. You're part of a group. You're part of a group that's interested in certain things. Nothing wrong with that. But if you look at the headlines, if you look at the European Union, this is the devil's work. You are tracking people, you know. So again, it's for me, it's a lot of noise for nothing. It's a lot of hysteria. Again, sounds like a very strong opinion. There might be edge cases and so on, but I'm just focusing on the big picture of the good that this information exchange allows and has allowed, because it's clearly working. You know, people are finding the stuff they are needed, and we should really focus on being true to what's happening in the world instead of developing scenarios of evil companies, evil corporations abusing your information and so on. The same applies, by the way, with the Cambridge Analytica thing, which was just, but let's not go into that. Perhaps we go into it in the AI and ML course. But anyway, so the idea is kind of beautiful, as Google said. We are exchanging values. I mean, every person is using Google search for free. You're using, you know, Google Maps for free. You're using all this stuff for free, Facebook for free. So you should pay in some way, right? So one way is the use of data. They monetize your data. They show you ads. That's it. So and then we need to define the nature of that social contract in terms of what are the boundary rules, you know, how they can sell that data and what do they do with that. But yeah, these companies already have some internal ethical understanding, so they are definitely not the big evil that they are labeled as in media. So anyway, now we have this reality where it's becoming more complex for consumers to make privacy preferences. They often don't read, they just click there and they just want to quickly access the website. That's how what I do as well. I don't interested. Track whatever you want to track, that's fine. Usually it's in my benefit. So I just accept what they want to track. But okay, there is now a stronger possibility for people who might have preferences of not being tracked to be in such a to make such choices. So it's fine. As marketers, there are also some opportunities here, which is remember I said we need to find ways forward. So let's try to pivot this into something positive. So there could be, for example, this is for a gift company. We did some consultation. So the idea is that if we ask a person, people information about their phone number or so on and so on, we need to explain for each specific piece of information why we ask for it, right? Because otherwise we shouldn't be asking it. And then that why can actually be a business case for us. So, if we ask for a phone number, we could say that we use it to remind you of your gift card expiry. And we also use it for, advertising if we were to use it for enriching our Facebook ads data. For example, there's this conversion API integration that helps us better match that, if you made a purchase through Facebook, you are being correctly mapped with our customer data. So that's why we exchange this in a hashed and secured format, which is, it's not done like that, very secure. They don't see the actual phone number, but they see a hashed version. So this giving a reason why, so providing some value. Okay, yeah, I get a notification is helpful, because a lot of people, their gift cards get expired because they forget about it, right? And the same thing about specific interests that they have, or specific reasons why they would like to be receiving information. So this can help us build a sort of a profile of a person. We understand their needs, and they can more customize the communication they want to be involved with. So yeah, it is sort of like, this win-win, that we inform what we are doing and why, and then we give an option to opt in or opt out. So when that is done in more granular way, then it can be beneficial for both the consumers and the companies. But yeah, we really need the data. So we need to comply with legislation. We need to inform users and customers on how we use their data. But we need to also incentivize the giving of the data so that we can access it also going forward. I think Mikko expressed it in a neat way, that there are several factors. Privacy, so this is legislation. There are ethics. What is the right thing of doing it, right? Because that's even more important than the law, right? If we are doing, we are not trying to harm anyone. We are not trying to manipulate. We are not trying to sell anyone's information. It's ethical. So that's more important than, following the law. And it was like that even prior to all this privacy regulation. I never used data, or at least don't remember, in a no unethical way. And I think most marketers definitely won't. We are not, selling emails or selling this and that. That's not our way of doing it. We just use it to send you emails, and you can opt out, you can unsubscribe. That's it. So it was quite easy. Yeah, and then profit. The company perspective. So what Mikko is saying here, that a lot of people just sort of see two things of this. They might see profit and law and not think about ethics, or then kind of this privacy enthusiasts. They just see the privacy in law, but they don't understand that companies need the data, and we need it to, run this business more efficiently, but it's also in the benefit of the consumer, like I said, with more relevant ad targeting benefits both parties, not only the companies. Whenever we can mitigate like unnecessary, irrelevant impressions, that's better because it's less annoying for the consumer, but it's also cheaper for the company, right? Because we don't have to pay for those wasted impressions, which means that we don't need to pass that cost to our products. Because ultimately, again, consumers pay. If we need to pay more for advertising to make the sale in the long run, companies will shift this into their product prices. And less efficient advertising means more expensive products as a whole for the whole ecosystem, whereas more efficient matching of supply and demand means we have to spend relatively less for advertising, which means that we have, for that part, we have to input less overhead into our products. So again, it's beneficial. So efficient markets are good, and part of it is this data. But there's also an element of the big companies, so especially Apple, doing a lot of strategic maneuvering, which hurt especially Facebook because they essentially cut out Facebook's tracking from iOS, and that hurt Facebook's numbers a lot. And when the numbers look worse, then advertisers cut their spending. So there are strategic elements. Of course, Apple continues to collect that data, but it doesn't share it with other parties. The same actually with Google. I'm not saying that Apple is the only one. All of these big companies are into their things. So Google collects a lot of stuff through Android. It's not sharing with anyone. It also collects a lot of stuff through its Google search. It's not directly sharing with advertisers. So they have their strategic reasons also. So let's say, from a small advertiser's point of view, it's already challenging because these platforms want to monetize the data themselves, and they don't want to give us the data out of their good hearts. So what is now happening is this privacy legislation is a good excuse for these companies to cut even more the information that they maybe one day Google will stop Google Trends, and they will say it's due to privacy reasons. So now we can use it for free, anyone in the world, to understand search trends. It's hugely valuable, right? They could cut it tomorrow and say it's because of the privacy reasons, and they wouldn't lose any money for it because it's just a free service they are using and they're not even monetizing it. So if they see it strategically useful to actually hide that information, they can use this privacy. Or then there might be a legitimate reason why all of a sudden privacy legislation is so tough that Google Trends is no longer possible. So they just stop giving it. They can stop keyword planner for the same reason or whatever. So they just have one big black box system. We get no data because everything violates privacy, but they still know the data. Unless, if legislation also blocks their use of data, oh, then we don't have Google, then we don't have anything. We can go back to newspapers and learning from books and all that, and maps instead of Google Maps. We have the physical maps. Let's go back into that era then, if data collection is not okay. So obviously we can see that there will not be such a future where we go back into that era. So they will always give the big companies a way of collecting that data. But then, big companies can use the privacy as a strategic reason to block other companies from accessing the data, as in the iOS case, or then they can use it as an excuse to block small advertisers from accessing the data, which is, it's problematic for the small players. Okay, so I mentioned this in one of the earlier lectures. This is the classic analytics dilemma. So half of the money I spend on advertising is wasted. I don't know which half. So this is the Wanamaker's dilemma, about 120 years old dilemma. So the idea here, I'm mentioning this because This was the background of where we were before web analytics. So we couldn't track anything correctly. So then came web analytics, and this is a screenshot from Google Analytics. It shows page searches generating 200 euros of revenue. So now we can see, and all these other organic search, direct traffic, generic page search, referral traffic, social media, display, email. We can see how much, okay, so now we have solved the problem. This was the earlier times of analytics when we were optimistic. It was before we had all these privacy issues, the strategic behavior of platforms, Google withdrawing a lot of information from, iOS blocking or Apple blocking others in iOS. Attribution problems, which we started to understand that, okay, this number is not actually true. It's not true. It's just an approximation. It has a lot of measurement error, duplication problems, and vanity metrics, and so on. So overall, we've realized that there's a lot of missing and incorrect data because we're not able to perfectly capture people and track them. And there are a lot of cases where they might not do clicking, but they might do thinking, and that affects their behavior. So we've now established that actually we haven't gotten rid of that Wanamaker dilemma. It still exists. And now we are in the stage of defining new paradigms to tackle this measurement. And new is kind of tricky because marketing mix modeling is based on econometrics, which is at least 50 years old idea, right? So we are rediscovering now these old measurements, and we are now developing SaaS tools to make it automated and easier, do this complex mathematical modeling. So that's a very exciting area. Also triangulation, as I mentioned, we are now going into the idea that, okay, we shouldn't just stare at the Google Analytics report. We should actually ask people how their behavior is driven by exposure to our marketing in different channels. And that attribution model can be completely different. I know there are some cases I've seen firsthand where the order of these channels drastically changes when we ask from people, which is super interesting. So triangulation means that we collect data from multiple sources and compare it. And then also this no analytics movement where we just focus on improving things and just focus on, let's say, sales and very coarse metrics and kind of try to get rid of all this complexity. It's also a backlash in moment. So we are almost out of time, unfortunately, but maybe this slide still, very important thing that as marketers never feel obliged to give an answer. You will face this situation many times in your careers where you're asked to answer based on incomplete information. Many marketers do it wrong here. They invent an answer. They overinterpret limited data. They use their imagination instead of their real thinking. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. There's not enough data to make a conclusion. So this is very important. Be truthful of, instead of storytelling is based on your conviction that you have found something. It's not based on your imagination that you think that, oh, it could be like this. So if you start thinking about storytelling as a creative exercise, it's not. It's about an analytical exercise where you truly believe that something holds in the data. You're convinced of that, then you tell the story. It's not that you look at some numbers and try to figure, oh, maybe it's like this and maybe like that, and create some kind of fictitious story. No, that's the wrong way of viewing. So don't be afraid of saying there's not enough data. Okay, with that we are out of time. Unfortunately, we skipped a few of them, but I don't want to go over time, so you can read the rest of the slides by yourselves. And yeah, have a good week and see you guys on Friday. I try to post the weekly task earlier this week, so check keep an eye on Moodle and it will appear there. Okay, have a good week. Bye.